Okay, hello, hi, I'm Matt. So this is episode 11 of Water Lobby podcast, and I have Matt Paneitz, who is also a former Austinite and now lives in Guatemala, very far away from Texas, his original home. And I've been living in Texas for around 8 years, and I think you've been living in Guatemala for longer than that. So, Matt, when did you first, like very first time, like even before you started your nonprofit, when was the first time you went to Guatemala, and which year was that?
I first moved to Guatemala in 2002 as a Peace Corps volunteer. And yeah, I've lived off and on in Guatemala for most of the last 23 years.
Wow, yeah, it's interesting. One of my former managers, I think he was also some way member of Peace Corps, like around that time, where I think he met his wife. So I've heard like some stories about Peace Corps, like being a good place for meeting people. Did you have like any great interesting stories from your time at Peace Corps?
Yeah, I'd say from our group, there were probably 4 or 5 lifelong couples that emerged, like marriages from our group of 50 Peace Corps volunteers. And yeah, like the people that helped to start the NGO were all former Peace Corps volunteers. So we formed close relationships during that time that have lasted pretty much every day since those years. Like those are my best friends now.
Okay. And so you went to Guatemala in 2002, and how long until it took you to actually first lay the foundation of Long Way Home? Which year did you start Long Way Home?
So after the Peace Corps, I went back to Ashland, Oregon, and I tried to settle into a fairly normal life. I enrolled in college, got a job, and then I kind of felt this calling to go back. And by January of 2005, I was in a car headed back to Guatemala, and I spent a big portion of 2004 filling out the paperwork to start the actual NGO.
And for listeners, I believe Long Way Home is a U.S. registered nonprofit, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But I would say 99% or more of its operations is based in Guatemala now. Most of the work is done in Guatemala. Is that correct to assume?
Yeah, that's correct. We were formed in the United States so we could receive money in the United States, but all of everything that we do, it happens in Guatemala.
So let's fast forward a few more. So in 2004, you started laying the foundation for Long Way Home, and let's fast forward many years into around like 2018 or 2022. Have you seen like a larger influx of Americans coming to Guatemala than before? How has it changed with the amount of tourism that you're seeing in Guatemala right now?
Yeah, I think Guatemala has slowly become safer and more popular. And I was in Antigua, which is a fairly popular tourist site in Guatemala for Halloween. And it's the most people I've ever seen in that town at one time. Right. But in Comalapa, where, our operations are and where we do hero school work, there's still really not very many tourists here because there's no real attractions. There's no lake, there's no volcanoes, but yet there still has been certainly an increase in tourists. In Comalapa and in Guatemala overall, I would say a significant increase.
And fast forward a few more years, in 2023, you received a recognition by UNESCO for your innovation in education and sustainable development. So just let's talk about like how the application process was for this. Did you had to apply for this recognition, or was it some journalist was able to identify your work? How did UNESCO come to know about the work that you were doing in Guatemala?
Well, it's not easy to form an official partnership with UNESCO. You have to do it through some established entity, and the entity that we had partnered with that time was the Ministry of Education in Guatemala. So we were in contact with the minister of education, and she helped us fill out the application. She nominated us. She did all of the legwork to make sure that all of the paperwork that we needed to do got into the right hands with the UNESCO people.
So just like slightly hinting in on, so have you noticed that it's easier or harder to work with like the government officials in Guatemala compared to being from Texas, the Texas government? You must have been around slightly. How's your experience been like different in with the government officials in Guatemala?
Sure. Well, there's some similarities there, because in East Texas, our state representative or our district representative actually lived in our neighborhood. And so we, cross paths every once in a while. In Guatemala, it feels like there's, always, a second or third degree of separation from the government people. And so if you don't have to look far to find somebody that knows one of the governors, one of the mayors, one of the senators from our area, because a lot of the people have had interactions directly with the government representatives. Like I had a meeting with the mayor of Comalapa last week, and his door was open. He invited us in. He offered the meeting, asked us if we needed anything, and was really proactive with the entire thing. So I feel like it's pretty easy if you need to work with government officials in Guatemala, that they're fairly accessible.
Yeah, that's always, I think, good signal for, there are a lot of people, I think, who always think about like, hey, I've lived a good life in United States, but now, for my retirement, I think I'm going to be priced out of this community that I'm living in. So I want to find some alternate place. So they're looking for places in Guatemala, in Belize, or even Honduras, and I would say El Salvador have been quite, some of the few Central American countries that have tried to like attract a lot of Americans in the last few years. Then I'm personally been like some slightly involved in like yoga, like learning yoga in Austin, and the amount of retreats that are happening right now in Guatemala and Central America is just, it's the amount of emails I receive every other week is a lot. Everybody wants me to come and visit some retreat in Guatemala, so I'm really happy that I'm getting to like talk with somebody who's living right now there and having a good time. So
yeah, I've noticed certainly an increase also in retreats, and Guatemala is accessible though. Like, from Houston, it's a 2.5-hour flight. It sounds exotic. It sounds like it might be 22 hours away, but yeah, it's easier to get from Houston to Guatemala than it is to get from Houston to Amarillo. It's a pretty short flight.
yeah, that's true. No, because I'm right now looking at some ski destinations in north, and anywhere up north, like North the Dakotas or Wyoming, those states which are more fancier. There are no direct flights from Austin. It's
No.
just, I've been like, oh, why can't I fly to Wyoming or some nice Idaho resort from Austin and be there in 3 hours? It's just not, doesn't exist right now. So hearing that there are flights which are like 2.5 hours from Houston or anywhere in Texas, I think it's definitely opens up a lot of people to their next destination for sure. And especially it's Christmas time coming up, and people might be looking at some holiday vacation spots. So I would definitely encourage to visit Central America. But I personally visited Colombia earlier this year. It was my first time being anywhere in South America in a Spanish-speaking country. But actually, I've been to Mexico once. But this time, I had to kind of navigate myself. And yeah, I've been learning Spanish for, I would say, 120 days on Duolingo. So I've had a 120-day streak now, and I'm trying to slowly, gradually, build up so that next time I'm anywhere in Central America, I can navigate myself. So that's
Yeah.
my experience.
We got pretty lucky. Our Peace Corps training came along with really extensive language training. And so right after you leave the Peace Corps training and you move into your community, then you're thrown right into the mix with everybody. And that's a great way to learn Spanish, because if you want to buy tomatoes, you have to learn how to say, I want to buy tomatoes. And then the next topic comes up. I want to fix my car, or I want to get an airplane ticket. It's very topical. And then you build it up along the way.
Yeah, and now it's becoming easier than ever. And I don't know if you've been in touch with like the advertisement in US, but they've launched new Meta glasses or the Apple EarPods, where now you can live translate anybody's language while they're speaking. So I'm sure like it'll be a few other years where they can understand me as well, because they would need similar pair of glasses or earpods. But I think we're getting there where like the language barriers are just being lifted. So I think that's a better world where we're not separated by languages, for sure.
I'm excited about that too, because now that I can speak Spanish, I feel like I've been opened up. I have the potential to communicate with like 1 billion more people on Earth and hear their points of view. And it's been really great. And I look forward to other people on Earth getting to have a similar experience and learning about other cultures and learning about how other people actually think, rather than what we hear on potentially the news.
So Matt, jumping back into your nonprofit, which is Long Way Home, I looked at the website and I saw that you're very focused on sustainable materials, and especially waste materials like tires, bottles, and other waste you can find. Why such a strong focus on tires or waste material? Why not bricks? Because I went to Colombia and everything's made by bricks. It's one of the largest exporter. No, actually, Colombia manufactures a lot of bricks and then it imports a lot of bricks. So it's net still importing a lot. And why not bricks? Why not like other building material as we use in US, like wood? Why buy tires?
Well, so in Guatemala, there's not a great system of trash removal, right? They're, in a country that doesn't have great healthcare or, enough funding for their educational system. They don't have a trash removal system, other than potentially a truck going from house to house and then, throwing it in a ravine. So whenever we first got here, there was absolutely no trash removal system. If you had trash, you either had to burn it, bury it, or throw it into a river. None of those things seemed reasonable to us, right? And so we combined that with the understanding that there was a need for infrastructure, right? So we saw a whole lot of people living in poverty. They didn't have, bathrooms or houses or retaining walls, schools, clinics. So we saw the trash and we saw the need and we combined them, right? And so now, instead of building a house out of cinder blocks, which don't insulate well, which don't resist well to earthquakes, if you lay a tire flat, you fill it with the dirt, you hit it with a sledgehammer, you basically are creating an adobe block that is surrounded by rubber, so it's never going to decompose. Also, these structures are earthquake resistant. So rather than being tied to a footer in the ground, they sit basically above ground. And so when there is an earthquake, they move along with the earthquake rather than resisting the earthquake. Also, after we tried a couple of times, we liked the fact that tires maintain a constant temperature within a space. So, when you build a house out of tires, it's kind of like, in a way, living in a cave, right? And it maintains a consistent temperature the same way a cave maintains a consistent temperature because the walls are so thick. So it's like, and we also wanted to create jobs. And by reducing the amount of cement that we were using and replacing that with soil, we could hire more people who needed jobs to support their families. So there's a ton of benefits to using trash rather than conventional materials alone. Now, that doesn't mean we didn't use any conventional materials, right? We still use rebar, we still use some cement, because we do have to use conventional materials to tie all of these waste materials together.
Yeah, that's pretty. I think that's very important, where we are able to like recycle and make use of anything that would rather go to waste or maybe cause pollution in the environment. Um, so, did it require like any education, or was there any stigma attached with using tires, like within the community? Were there people who had their questions, disbelief, or um, maybe wanted to talk to you about a specific focus on your materials, and how would you address their like concerns of people who over many years asked these questions many times to you, like um yeah, like what's been your answer to them for why, like basically again, why tires?
Yeah, it's pretty funny when you tell anybody locally who's never heard of this and say, hey, we're going to build a building out of tires. They look at you like you're crazy. And they're right to do that because it sounds like it's going to have trash sticking out and it's going to look silly. And the way that we were able to answer the question was build a couple of buildings and then plaster them with lime plaster. And then the finished product looks pretty much like you finished it with drywall. You can't see the tires behind the finished plaster. And so whenever whenever they hear about it, they're like, that sounds ridiculous. When they see it, they say it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my entire life. And then they feel the temperature, and then they feel how stable it is, and then they really start to like it because it's a solid structure. And in 1976 there was an earthquake here, and a lot of the buildings fell, and a lot of the structure, and then a lot of the roofs fell in on people, and a lot of people died. So they love the idea of building a structure that's sound, that is going to protect them.
And like I wanted to just mention, when I was in high school and we had our like high school science project, one of the things that I did with my friend at that time, we built a building, and then we, instead of using traditional foundation, we put some wheels on the foundation and kind of tried to showcase how, if an earthquake happens and the top, like the surface shakes, like it there, if you leave some room for the building to move, it just helps like the overall structure. And I mean, we didn't win anything, but it was definitely one small step in my journey towards being a civil engineer. So now so I've been practicing civil engineering for 8 years now, and I'm slowly like climbing my way up in American Society of Civil Engineers as well. And I'm also the local like president of the EWRI chapter. And in ASCE, I mean, they always talk about like how they're going to you know do sustainable design or make buildings that are earthquake proof. And one of the big challenges of like being in United States is that it's very hard to push a construction project off the ground, let alone something that deviates from the specs and the standards. And the specs and the standards that are set by ASCE, that are set by local jurisdiction. And one this is a very fresh image in many people's memory, where Miami, there was this earthquake, I think like last year, and this whole building collapsed. And one of the big issues was just the disrepair of the foundation. And then they looked at every other building around that building, and they were like, all these buildings are built on like this specific soil that doesn't hold any bearing. And yeah, I think there are a lot of large condos in Miami that are just looking for a demolition plan or something, and just yeah, that's. Do you have any like word of wisdom for builders who are building in Miami or other cities where earthquake have been an issue in US, and um, maybe not for like 50 stories, but how would you tell them like, hey, maybe move out of specs a little bit?
Yeah, well, I've seen there's a community in New Mexico, and they started building homes, and these homes were using cans and tires and were not conventional. And in order to get permission to do that, they spent a lot of time lobbying to get the people in their state legislature to allow them to build this way. And it did take some time, but they were successful, and they were able to adjust building codes. And because of the work that they did to adjust the building codes, that opened the door to tons of opportunities for other builders who had a similar idea in mind to live sustainably, to figure out and make a contribution to those building codes as well, and say not only that we would like to do this the original way, that the first people who got the flexibility with the building codes, but that opened the door to tons of people with ideas. And then the building codes started to evolve from there. So yeah, there's, it's not easy, but we've seen some light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's very good advice to keep working towards change, and keep talking about it, because international building codes, they are pretty rigid, but I think we're in a time where I think a lot of these agencies are looking for what the next 10 years or 20 years would look like, and I think a lot of people can make that change happen. So talking about Long Way Home again, so how, like, I've seen that you have this one division which is focused on like building homes, and then you have one in which people come and see your homes. People can also come and volunteer their hours, I think, for building the home itself, and then people can donate. Is there anything I'm missing, or what other vertical exists, or what else does Long Way Home does outside like these? I'm thinking education is also a big part, right?
Yeah, so yeah, volunteers play a critical role in everything that we do, because we need people's ideas. So we start off with an idea, and then a civil engineer from Austin shows up on our site and goes, hey, have you ever thought about this? And we hadn't thought about that. And then they make an important contribution to that building, or they go, hey, these are how far you could put your columns apart, or you need to put them closer together, or you need to make them bigger. We can't come up with all of the architecture, all of the engineering in order to do these buildings the best way that is possible, right? So we depend on people who, with ideas, with training, with the desire to help, to push our mission forward. And so, yeah, outside of that, we also do a lot of education in primary, middle, and high school of local students, because the national curriculum has some flexibility. So a lot of the teachers, the national curriculum will tell you what the learning objective is. This is where you need to get the students so that they can take the test. Where you find flexibility is they don't necessarily tell you how. I think in the United States, there are a lot of lesson plans that come along with the curriculum development, and the teachers probably need to follow the lesson plans. Guatemala doesn't have a lot of lesson plans. So what we saw within that flexibility was, instead of you doing, somewhat abstract math, that the students in our 7th grade could apply their math to build ventilated stoves. So we consider the community our laboratory. And within that, we say, okay, how can we improve the community? And how can we use math at our school to improve the community? Because there are a lot of people living in poverty. So the same thing happens in social studies class. Rather than potentially the students doing some abstract survey that doesn't really result in anything, they go from house to house and figure out what the local living conditions are like. And then we've done this in all grades through primary, middle, and high school to make sure that our students are involved in the sustainable development happening in their own community. Then that opens the door to innovation. We get them started. We say, build a ventilated stove, a water tank, a compost latrine, a retaining wall, a home, a clinic. We talk about it. We try to do it together. And then what we're seeing are this opens the door to the students going, hey, I have an idea. What do you think about this? And then we have this ongoing process in which we're trying to integrate their ideas into the curriculum.
Yeah, that's pretty fantastic, especially giving them hands-on training on things that contribute to society. And yeah, we try, like in my minor role as the president of local EWRI chapter. What we do for our high school students is we provide them scholarships so that they can pursue a career which over time will help the civil engineering industry or water resource environmental science to progress. And what we have found is some of these students do pursue the careers and then also come back and join our local chapter of EWRI. So you've operated kind of for 20 years and a little more than that. So over this time, how successful has maybe this program been in terms of bringing the students back into a long way home, or the mission of long way home? So maybe there might be 4 or 5 students that have graduated high school, who participated in your program when they were in 7th grade. Have you seen like any anecdotal example of one student who might have came back to either join you directly at long way home, or they indirectly at some other way capacity pursued the mission of sustainable living?
Well, what we have seen is that a lot of the students that graduate, whenever it comes time for us to actually build one of the projects in our community, if we want to build a ventilated stove or a water tank, our graduates will at times jump back into the mix with our 7th or 8th grade or 9th grade students and go, hey, I've done this 6 times. I know how to do it. I'll be a mentor and I'll assist in the 7th graders completing their project. And then the 7th graders see that, an older student has had some success with this. They look up to them, and then, a bond is formed. No, when you leave our school, it's not like you can go into a career in sustainable development around here. There's not a lot of options to do that. But what we've seen is that our students who decide to become nurses or lawyers or doctors or engineers or architects, well, what would they be had they not had the opportunity? How would it be for them going into those careers had they not had some practice with it early on in their education? We haven't been doing this long enough to go, okay, most of our students that go from our school into architect school are now building houses out of tires. What we do know is that when they walk into architect school or engineering school, that is the sense that they're bringing with them. And then occasionally they will bring back a cohort of their classmates to show their classmates what we've done. Right. And so, some of our students who now want to be teachers, they'll come back and do their practicum with us. They'll send other teachers from other colleges to do their practicum with us, right? Because they appreciate how it went for them. They want other people to have a similar experience.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of countries struggle with, is like providing that spark early on when kids are still young. And because I remember like a story where there was a kid who only worked on like automobile repair shops. And growing up, once he grew up, he wanted to be an automobile like person, or somebody who saw a plane fly over his head once and he was like, hey, I want to be a pilot. So it definitely gives me strong sense of like what you're trying to build there is these community members who now they're seventh graders, but maybe in 5 or 10 years they will be pursuing some of the large infrastructure projects right there in Guatemala, and building the community that um, you know you and many others are working towards, and to especially help rebuild this country after some earthquakes that they've seen. Or so that definitely goes a long way. And I did wanted to switch it a little slightly towards crypto. So crypto is one of the subjects that I really find fascinating, especially whenever I talk about South America, because uh, so there is a person called Balaji Srinivasan who was the CTO at Coinbase, and then he flew around this idea of startup cities or crypto cities, and then many of his followers started building startup cities in Honduras and other countries. And I think this might be a more recent phenomena, like last 5 to 8 years, where El Salvador recently adopted Bitcoin as one of their currencies. And I have some of in-laws from who visit El Salvador, and they tell me stories about, yeah, it's actually happening. Like people are using Bitcoin here. Um, so, is there been like an influx of crypto community into Honduras? Um, uh, I mean, there has been in Honduras. I know about Honduras, but how have you seen crypto adoption, or just American crypto investors come to Honduras and maybe invite you to one of their talks because you're one of the few Americans living there? Like, have you seen any crypto there?
No, I haven't yet. And I took a look at the link that you shared with me to because I really don't know much about it. And so I think it's a great idea. I'd love to try anything that would benefit society. And it seems like, why not do some type of startup where you're starting from scratch and building something clean from the very beginning that does involve people. But yeah, I have not seen anything like this in Guatemala yet. And I haven't traveled Central America extensively in the past 5 to 8 years to see those cities as they build up. So I really, unfortunately, don't know much of anything at all.
Yeah. Yeah, part of it is just like me living in Austin. I get to, attend some of these crypto stuff, and I attended this one with White Ellie where they were like encouraging people who are living in Austin to move to Honduras for a few weeks and see the work they've done at startup city or crypto city or longevity city. So it's this longevity in Austin as a whole like big microculture of itself, where people are trying to experiment on their bodies and try to like live longer or cure diseases which don't have like a FDA approved cure. Just with similar to, but one of the challenges that early on they face is that, hey, they don't have an environment or regulatory framework where they can experiment with all this, and the first thing they come to mind is, hey, why not move to Central America, and why not start a city from scratch? Because the things that you're describing about, like, hey, their government is accessible, I can talk to the mayor and he asks me like, what are some problems that you're facing? So many of the Central American countries are doing the same thing. It's very nice when everyone's competing for talent. It's just very breath of fresh air, which we don't always see. And yeah, these some of these guys are doing I have never been to their cities, but they're trying to do something very similar that you are doing, but in a different space. You're very much focused on infrastructure. They're focused on infrastructure. And one thing I really liked in your website was you had designs of like various buildings. So one that caught my eye was a bamboo building with rainwater harvesting built in. it was pretty because I was like, yeah, I mean, makes sense. Bamboo is hollow. You just, place some bamboo sticks next to each other to get a frame, and you provide sufficient slope, and the water will trickle in and fall into another bamboo stick, and you get the whole system without like putting extra pipes. Like, what's your thought process been behind that particular like design?
Well, bamboo, first of all, Guatemala is pretty reforested, right? So we're trying to use the least amount of lumber that we possibly can. And because bamboo, it grows on the coast and it's fairly easily accessible and it regenerates fairly quickly, it is a preferred material. Now, bamboo is not the easiest material to work with because it's round, first of all, but by the time you've cured it and made it usable, the thing is it lasts forever, right? And if it does start to decompose, it's easily replaceable because there's so much of it, which also makes it really cheap, right? And so we want to protect, we also plant trees at our school, and so we're aware of how important it is to continue planting trees and use materials that are replaceable, right? And so, yeah, bamboo is another one of the materials that we decided to try over time because we did tires, we did earth bags, we've done Ubuntu blocks. A lot of what we're doing is research on what makes sense to use and that the average person could potentially replicate. And yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, that's pretty great. So I wanted to talk briefly about collaboration and like what other agencies or nonprofits you collaborate with frequently. We talked about UNESCO being one of the agencies which have recognized you. In Austin, I come across Engineers Without Borders, which does similar work where they provide engineers to do design in Central American countries. Then there is Bridges to Prosperity, where they build bridges, I think mostly in Africa. Um, what organizations do you collaborate with, or they come to you, or you come to them? Like,
Well, right now, we're building a school out in a small village near Comalapa, and we're collaborating with ecohab.org. And EcoHab has some of the best green builders on the planet right now. And we say we'll provide the location. They say we'll provide labor and the design, and then we work together. And that whole project was possible because of teamup.org said, hey, we'll raise the money, we'll bring some volunteers as well. So now we are three organizations working together. And because of that collaboration, this classroom will happen and nobody will be too terribly out of pocket by the way that we've collaborated. We also work with Terra Firma Floors because we build 12 floors per month, right? So instead of building up a really big budget and then us trying to figure out how to get the money, what we do is we go to specialists. Terra Firma Floors are specialists in floors. There is Water Access to All People, WATA.org. They provide us with a couple hundred water filters per year that we distribute to the family members in our village. We also partner, and we've done water for 8 complete villages with Engineers Without Borders. And that has happened over about a 20-year process. We have a long history with Engineers Without Borders. Might.org is one of the organizations that's really cool to check out. And they did a great job of vetting us. And they vet hard and they liked what they saw. And then they decide to fund some of our projects. So we really depend on collaboration. And actually recently the municipal government of our town has said, hey, we'll throw money for a lot of your projects. Like we wanted a new source of water for our school because we actually still don't have a reliable source of water. They said, we'll build a water tank for the whole neighborhood. Would you guys build a retaining wall to support the area around the water tank? And we said yes. So these collaborations are happening all over the place around us, and they're an essential part of our success.
Yeah, I think yeah, I'm kind of like seeing this trajectory also, where I feel like previously the government would always be like, "Hey, we got this," and they would fail miserably like on every single project. They won't build anything. And now, what every government is trying to do is like partner with like more agencies, so that they're like, "Hey, we are good at governing and start making laws and making sure it's legal, but anything beyond that, they're not really the most efficient people to do work with." But in Austin especially, like they partner with so many nonprofits here. And yeah, but the city has struggled recently. The city of Austin is trying to raise property taxes, and the voices are very strong against it and for it. Right now, the election's still in the process, but Austin statesman has come out against it, which was very shocking for all people. Like Austin Statesman's very progressive paper, and the New York Times, out of all, has also published an article just this morning criticizing the tax increase. And I'm like, if New York Times and Statesman are against you, then there's a strong chance that this proposition might not pass. Prop Q. And historically, in the last 5 or 10 years, Austin, every time they have asked to raise property taxes, it has passed. Like it has been 100% of the time that it passes. But this time it feels different. We'll see. It might pass again. I don't know. But what they are trying to say is like this tax increase will address homelessness in Austin. And right now, I think any city on average, like in US, spends around $1 million per homeless person, per year, just to keep up with making sure they're still in the street. I don't want to say anything wrong, but that what the end objective seems to be right now is making sure people are still on the street. There are some nonprofits I've seen who've built communities around Austin, like in the suburbs or outside the city of Austin limits, where they're allowed to kind of function more easily and allowed to provide like housing for people who were evicted. And so that seems to be working a little bit. The reviews are not all positive on that either. But how can the green building concepts or using recycled material, because I'm sure Austin Resource and Recovery, which is one of our solid waste agencies here, they collect a lot of waste. There's a lot of waste coming out of city of Austin or any major city in US. How can these cities use recycled materials to provide housing for the homeless? Is there a possibility that you see, because you've worked 20 years on this, you're kind of a subject matter expert at this point. How do you see, you've done the proof of concept, it's already happening in Guatemala. How do you see it, maybe your return one day, and you can maybe magic wand and city gives you $1 billion and you can solve homelessness? Like how would you see it as a solution?
Well, I might get elected to be mayor of Austin if I answer this correctly. That's the big question. I might even make it up to governor, right? If I had $1 billion, I would become the Secretary of Education, and I would rewrite education in Texas to include youth, right? To say, okay, in first grade, we're going to address this problem of homelessness, of infrastructure, of sustainability. And I want the kindergarten students, excuse me, and I want the kindergarten students to work on this first, second, third. I want students at all grade levels to address these issues so that when they got into college, that they would also be able to take this and that they would be able to work democratically with each other to address these issues that are not ever going to go away, right? As we increase the, Austin's a wonderful place to live. More people are going to move there. The cost of housing is going to go up, right? And there's going to be less space to put everybody at some point. They're going to produce more waste. Where is all of this going to go? I don't think anybody really has the magic answer to this question, but if you were to address it systematically, you would need to address it with more members of the community thinking about it at a systematic level, starting in school, right? And then by the time potentially that kindergartner had been working on it for 13 years, they get to college or whatever they decide to do next, they're probably going to be pretty well informed on this subject. And if we didn't have that many years to wait for this, I would clearly start building homes using waste so that you can reduce the cost of the home. You can replace, instead of going straight cement, you can add bottles. I would make it a volunteer opportunity, right? I would say, if I was the mayor of Austin, I would say you can not pay this speeding ticket potentially if you'll spend 2 hours doing community service building these homes. I would unite the NGOs, right? Because there are a lot of people in Austin who are very concerned about this topic, who care a lot about sustainable living. And I would make this a center point. I would make uniting them behind this concept a center point. I would make it a wonderful space to practice democracy as well and go, hey, this is a strength. We have a lot of people interested in this topic. Let's leverage this interest, leverage the intelligence of the people of Austin, the university resources. Let's work on this together. And I think I could knock it out in an afternoon.
Yeah, I really liked when you said, paying the parking ticket with community service. And I had similar thoughts on hey, we pay so much money to property taxes, and what's the objective is you give the money to government, the government gives money back to communities who need it. But what if instead of giving my money, I can just give my work, my hours, my labor, and maybe it doesn't translate to what I'm earning in my private job, but I'll try my best. I'll spend 10 community hours or 100 hours every year through one of the nonprofits that builds home, and maybe you give me a rebate on my property taxes. So that's something that's been on my mind as well, where I think the city definitely needs to fix priorities from always trying to raise taxes. And second one, where you said about parking tickets, that's another area where Austin is actually lagging right now, where they've had a deficit on the ticket collections as well. They haven't been able to collect as many parking tickets as they were hoping. So two areas where I think the city can improve majorly, and that too, and third one where a nexus of all the nonprofits that are working in Austin. I think everybody needs to just first have a seat at the table, and second, be able to talk to each other. That those are really important topics, because I feel somebody told me what's work, so I'm a physics or science engineering background, and work is force multiplied by direction or something, that and mass, and basically if you work towards pushing a wall, you're still end up doing zero work. So I feel a lot of agencies or nonprofits are working a lot, but they're just in different directions, and some agency needs to bring them all together. And I think that could be a mayor's job, where they brings all of them together and tells them hey, we are doing this thing, these are our objectives, and we're going to all move in this direction, and we're going to solve homeless crisis in Austin once and for all. And with including the effort from our students, teachers, and the community members, I think there is a solution somewhere lingering in that conversation.
Recently, right now we're building this classroom out in a small village, And whenever we left our job site on Thursday, what we saw were a whole bunch of community members going over to the pre-K school, and they were building new bathrooms, right? And then I saw a separate group going over to the health clinic, and they were fixing the plumbing in the health clinic, right? So this community is a small, rural, poor community. But what it seems like they do really well is as soon as there's a problem, they get the smartest people, or the most able people to deal with a certain topic. They say, hey, will you work on this? None of those people were being paid for what they were doing, but in a fairly short amount of time, they pulled the right people together and they fixed something, and they did it well, and they did it fairly quick, and it didn't cost anybody any more money, and nobody raised property taxes.
I know that's right there. I wish we could amplify this message a little bit, and within the city of Austin, that would help a lot of people. A lot of council people need to hear this. And I did wanted to talk about the temperature of tires. You mentioned somewhere that um, you like that the temperature remains pretty constant. Do you think it's a good material for a place like Texas, where it gets like up to 102 degrees in summers and low 40s in winters? Like, because you know, so it's something sad. But when the recent storm happened in Austin like 2 weeks ago, a lot of homeless people died because they were in the storm tunnel, and they just got washed away. And this happens way more than like we can imagine in our like day-to-day lives, like places like Vegas, where there's a whole community of homeless people living in the tunnels, stormwater tunnels, and other cities where as well, where people are forced to live under a bridge or a tunnel. um, how do you present like the issue of heat and cold weathers that we face in US as tires as a building material?
Yeah, the first time I saw tires, people living in homes made out of tires, it was in Taos, New Mexico. And in Taos, it gets to be, 8 degrees outside. It gets really cold, and probably even colder than that. And then it also gets to be 115 degrees outside during the summer. And if you position the houses correctly, facing the north to capture the sun whenever it's really cold outside, well, then that is absorbed into the home and into the walls, and then slowly released, right? And so, in even more extreme temperatures than what you would find in Texas, it works really well. I've seen them in Montana. I've seen them in Honduras. I've seen them in Colombia. I've seen them in places that had, similar questions. They were like, well, how is this going to work? And then we built it, and yeah, they don't have to pay any type of heating or air conditioning costs.
So, but so you mentioned Taos. Taos is on my list for traveling for skiing next year. Were you a big skier growing up, or how did you go to Taos?
I was a typical Texas skier, where I would go to Colorado and ski for holidays now and again. But the reason I'm so familiar with Taos is because there was an entire community out on the mesa in Taos that built homes out of tires and all kinds of other reusable materials. And when you go to Taos, I can certainly put you in contact with the leaders of these organizations, and you're welcome to take tours of the houses that they built so that you can feel it for yourself during the winter time, what it's like to walk into a house made out of tires in January or December.
I think that I'm gonna have to take you up on that offer pretty soon, and because whenever I go to a new city, I try to find places which inspire me. Because in Bogota, Colombia, I mean, their transit system is impeccable. Buses and trains. It's pretty cool. And then their sidewalks. They have sidewalks pretty much covering the whole city, and it was just really surprising for me. Because in Austin, the cost of sidewalk I think it's like $1,000 per feet. is the city estimate of like per foot of sidewalk, and they realize it's so expensive to build sidewalks that they would rather uh, put like traffic cones and to provide accessibility. I was like, that's such a unit economics challenge that I feel like could be solved, but they just, yeah, we'll talk about that later. But um, so how does like water harvesting function in recycled homes? Or I don't. So first, please correct me. What's the right terminology for like the homes that you're building? Is it recycled homes? Is it sustainable homes? What's the right word? How do you brand it?
We haven't actually coined a single term for this, off-grid, sustainable, you know, some people call them earthships, right? Earthship is a term that is related directly with these concepts. But we have not coined a single term. There were kind of is an umbrella term for all that we do.
So in Honduras, I believe it's coastal, so it should probably rain a lot. I think water scarcity is an issue still because clean water remains tough for communities. How are like these housing solutions targeting water harvesting?
Yeah, well, back to Taos. Taos does not get much water out in the desert. And yet, if you collect the water off of your roof, you put it in water tanks, and then you tie it into your central systems in your house, what you end up with is the ability to use the water that you harvest from your roof, right? And that's usually what happens. And there's a couple of different roofs. We have a tendency to use concrete roofs because they last a long time, and there's not paint necessarily related to like you would have potentially on corrugated metal roofs or other types of roofs. Now, you can't use a shingle roof to harvest water, but yeah, there are a variety of materials that you could use that would redirect the water into a tank behind your home that you could potentially use throughout your house.
So for somebody who might have a big ranch in Texas, and they want to, they won't be able to build a house with tires, but they want to still start somewhere. And how can they use sustainable materials to maybe build a pond or some landscaping element where they can use the recycled materials? Like, what are other options of getting in? Like, what's the gateway mechanism to be a more sustainable rancher or a sustainable person who has land without having to build a house?
Yeah, well, solar helps, right? And going off grid makes you more sustainable. And there are a lot of programs through the state governments that offer solar packages. And then, yeah, it would be nice to have a pond potentially where you could collect water and then pump that water back into your home, and then use lily pads and fawn or lily pads and vegetation to help maintain the water and clean the water before you pumped it back into your house. But of course, you would need filters, you would need all the other different apparatus to make it actually usable. Then you would have your garbage set up to where you would compost what you can. Then you would potentially have glass bottles, plastic bottles separated that you would eventually be putting back into some structure near your house rather than ever putting anything back into the landfill. A lot of what people do is reconsider how they live, right? Because you may find out that if you want to live sustainably, that you might have to reduce some of your consumption, right? Yeah. And that it's not a terrible idea, or it doesn't have to interfere with your lifestyle in order to decide to live sustainably. In fact, Einstein said everything that I own is like a chain around my neck. right? And so that reduction of actual, it, it's beneficial to have less to worry about, is what I think that Einstein was saying, in simplifying your life and simplifying your consumption in order to live more sustainably. I don't know if the technology is going to bring us in a direction where everybody can consume every single bit as much as they possibly want and then still say, how can I have a sustainable lifestyle?
Yeah, I think this is one of the challenges that are happening right now about consumption, where I don't know if you know, but they're ending SNAP supplemental nutritional program because of the budget cuts, or which because of the federal government shutdown. The SNAP is probably not going to be funded for like a few weeks until they pretty much bring the money back for federal government to operate. But what we're seeing in Austin right now is, or in anywhere in Texas, is people are doing food drives. So people who are like have more food, they are going to either directly to community shelters or through nonprofits or food banks and donating, some of the excess food that they have, so that people can go to food bank and receive the food. Um, yeah, I mean, I think people are definitely, a lot of people are thinking in that direction where, they don't have to, have basically, their closets full of food while some other family is, struggling with their basic meals. And yeah, I think some questions that I think we're having to like give a harder thought and more immediate thought than people would otherwise. Like, I think these are some things that we don't really think about. I mean, nobody debates about SNAP subsidies in US, but this is, I think, first time where we're hearing more about it. And yeah, to the point where I think, I don't know if Gabriel Iglesias, Fluffy, is one of a famous comedian, and he said that in his next concert that he's doing in San Antonio, he's not selling tickets. Instead, people have to bring 3 cans of food and donate to the him, and he'll give it to the San Antonio Food Bank. And just those, that's very, very like ingenious of Fluffy to like think about it in a creative way, the way it he does his profession of stand-up comedy, and he's able to like give back to the community in the way that he can do it. And that's been like, I feel like more and more people are starting to realize that we have to live within our means and help thy neighbor, kind of the original teaching, I would say. Yeah. So what's next for Long Way Home? Like, you've finished 20 years, a big milestone. Congratulations to you for reaching this. What's the next 20 years look like? What's the roadmap? What are your big 3 pain points? What would you say to that?
Well, we're really excited about the fact that we're close to finishing our lesson plans, that we can share the lesson plans that we've written at our school with public schools in the area. That should change the way that education is conducted, at least from during primary, middle, and high school. And rather than providing a somewhat abstract education, that the education is going to shift towards hands-on education, specifically for the fact that we need to deal with the fact here that there are so many people living in extreme poverty. And so instead of 7th graders doing abstract education, they're going to deal with the fact that a lot of people in this town cook over open flames indoors. And because the mayor does not necessarily have the ability to go into every single home where that is happening and build them a stove, and all the other NGOs that potentially are working on that and can't get to it, well, our answer is we're going to put the 7th graders in public school in charge of dealing with this issue. Now, if that goes well, it would potentially happen to the next town. And how many towns do you think there are in Central and Latin America where this is a problem? I would say almost all of them. Right. And so we're going to once again prove the concepts. We're going to put our education model in the hands of public schools and say, let's solve extreme poverty and let's do it together. And let's also improve the quality of education and then see what innovations come out of that. Right. Because that's potentially how another sustainable city or the city that you were describing emerges from within that space. That will ignite people's curiosity, their interests, and it'll help them to know that that there's a lot of possibilities out there that we have not yet explored. So yeah, I couldn't be any more excited about the fact that we're potentially going to end a lot of the extreme poverty that exists in this town in the very near future, because in my opinion, it's pretty immoral.
Yeah, I think so. From where I'm seeing, you went from 0 to 1, and you've built this program, which works, has proven to work, received recognition from UNESCO, and now you're, you're in a scaling mode. You're in the mode of being a hyperscaler. You want to have multiple chapters within every district, school, university that you can imagine. So. If so, am I reading it correct? Like you're in the scaling phase of Long Way Home?
That's exactly right. We spent 20 years doing the research, improving the concept. Now we're ready to scale.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. It's a funny fact, like Texas Roadhouse. It's a Texas staple, and the founder of Texas Roadhouse, he was very focused, like, hey, we are only going to be in Texas. And then great brand, built this reputation, and then when he died like 2 years ago, all his investors were like, okay, now it's time to scale. So now they're building Texas Roadhouse in every state that they can. That's one, I think, interesting example of scaling. And then I was listening to a podcast called Acquired, where talked about Trader Joe's and how, like, even though it's such a known brand, they're mostly were in West Coast, and only in 90s they started like going to East Coast, and very recently they still haven't opened a single store outside US. So I believe, like, scaling is such a hard problem in itself, where even brands like Trader Joe's are taking it like slow. They're like, hey, we know we can do it. We have a great demand, like outside Canada wants it, Europe wants it, but Australia wants it, but they haven't like pressed the button on scale yet. So I'm really excited for your next journey of, like, going beyond Guatemala, and I wish you luck on your journey for sure. Yeah, I mean, I'll be really excited to see as well, like, what happens and how you reach multiple chapters. So like, so I believe you're focusing on, like, how to reach younger audience, or how to, like, reach people in colleges, schools, reaching people through technology. Like, what's your roadmap, like personal roadmap on, like, hey, this is how I'm going to accomplish this scaling issue?
Well, what we figured out over all this time is that we don't have to dramatically increase our budget in order to scale, because the public school teachers don't have access to lesson plans, and they would like lesson plans in order to make their lives easier. Because a lot of times what they're doing, because they don't have textbooks here, they don't have a lot of the materials they need, they're sort of shooting from the hip whenever they walk into class. It would make their lives easier if they had the materials that we're able to provide them, so they would potentially accept our materials and go, oh, so with your lesson plans, now I can properly engage my students in the community. So it's in the student's best interest, it's in the teacher's best interest to work with these lesson plans to also solve the poverty, because this poverty exists for their neighbors, for their family members, for their friends. So it's really a win-win-win-win-win situation without having to dramatically increase our budgets. right? And so that's kind of the key to the entire thing, is the buy-in from the other teachers. And because a lot of our teachers from our school have moved into the public school system and are already within that space and are excited to use these lesson plans, and all they need is a little bit of push and for us to finish writing all of the lesson plans, well, then there you go. That's how it scales. Then the next town over will go, wow, you eliminated extreme poverty by working with the primary, middle, and high school students, and you didn't require a ton of money to do it. Who's going to say no to that? What politician's going to go, you know what? I think that I'm not going to put that on my ballot. I'm not going to make that a central issue. It's a winning issue. And I can't imagine a single person going, you know what? I'd like things to remain as they are right now. Because it's not a huge ideological push. Right? There's nobody saying you have to be right or you have to be left. This is not progressive. It's not conservative. It is human dignity, right? And everybody benefits. So we've made it easy, is what we did. We spent a lot of time, 20 years doing the research in order to make it easy.
Yeah, I have some school teacher friends, and they told me about this one, and I saw it firsthand also, that there's nonprofit, more religious nonprofit in Texas called Texas Values, where what they did was they said every school in Texas needs to have 7 commandments available in every classroom. And there was a major pushback, especially in our cities, which are dark blue in Texas, and they were like, hey, we don't want religion to be forced on students and this and that. But what happened recently this year was they were able to push it through the ballot and get the governor's signature on it. And now every Texas school has to have 7 commandments in their classrooms. And Texas Values, what they did a fantastic job on was the fundraising part, where they raise so much funds for this one issue that they have an unlimited supply of 7 commandments, and they're just pushing it into every classroom. And that's such a scale question, where they were able to first get the legislature on board, they were able to get the governor on board, they were able to get everyone excited, and everybody put their money onto this problem, where I feel like, so yeah, I mean, I just feel like the Democratic Party in Texas has been lagging on finding that one issue where they can also, you said something about curriculum, or the, I don't know what word you used for the book for teachers. What was it called? The teachers don't have
lesson plans.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I feel like there is a huge need on the Democratic Party side, where they don't have a single issue lesson plan or something similar way, where they can also publish it in their states and try to prove that, hey, this is a better use of taxpayer funds, or this is a better use of students' time. Or it's just, I think that there is something there as well, where I feel like a lot of people can benefit from a lesson plan for sure. So yeah, I mean, I really like our conversation and the answers, and I hope you well, and I'll try to keep track of what happens on your social media and website. So thanks so much for joining us on the episode 11 of Water Lobby Podcast. Is there any closing remarks that you wanted to add about anything that we didn't touch on?
Yes, to your listeners, donate. And then as soon as you donate, then keep your eyes peeled for the New York Times headlines where it says Guatemala school ends poverty. The first time it's happened in the world, and 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th graders were responsible for it. It's going to be a sweet headline, so I highly recommend anybody donate to that headline, because we're going to do it.
Yeah, with that, thank you for listening to the Water Lobby Podcast.